All right, good morning, everybody. Today is February 26th. I'm Mr. Sheridan. This is Zoology. We are picking up where we left off on livestock judging. Today, we're going to talk about a couple things in regards to carcass quality. When we're judging steers, again, we're talking about what is the purpose of these animals that we're actually evaluating. And with steers in particular, we're trying to create good carcass animals. So the two things that we're going to talk about, we've alluded to these over the last week, are what quality grade and what yield grade are. We heard in amongst all the fluff and stuff that the people who were giving reasons yesterday, they were talking about on the rail and what these cattle are going to grade and those sorts of things. This is what they're referring to. These are the two major carcass scores that livestock get when they hang on the rail after they've been slaughtered. Quality grade, let's start here. Quality grade refers to how much intramuscular fat is in the muscle of that animal. So we're talking about amount of intramuscular fat. This is going to be on a scale from select to prime, with a very important stopping point in the middle, which is choice. If you look at steaks in the supermarket, you're going to see them labeled somewhere in here. You're going to see that they have a USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. Every single slaughterhouse has a USDA inspector in it, and they are going to give every piece of beef a quality grade, referring to how much intramuscular fat that particular piece of beef has. They're going to give them a grade that varies from select, and then there's certain variations of this. It's not just select, choice, or prime. They can be low choice, high choice, low prime, high prime. There's variations in between there, but these are the things that you need to know, that if we say that a steer is going to grade select, that means that they are not going to have a ton of fat, meaning that they're probably just not quite ready. They haven't been on feed long enough to put on enough fat to be able to put a lot of fat in their muscle. So the versus choice, when we say that a steer wants to grade choice, we don't want to send cattle to market without them being able to grade choice. There are significant docks or reductions in pay. There's a lot of feedlots across the country that are paid on how their cattle grade, depending when they're actually slaughtered. And if they don't grade choice, they're going to get a dock. When we talk about prime, these are fat cattle. Somebody, I think the other day, mentioned Wagyu beef, or there's a few different other breeds of beef that are famous for having an incredible amount of intramuscular fat. Those animals are going to grade prime. Shout out to our Holstein people. Although the dairy industry, when you look at a dairy cow, you don't think of them actually grading choice, but surprisingly, actually, the Holstein breed does a very good job of putting fat into muscle. Holsteins actually have a very high likelihood of grading choice as compared to some breeds of beef cattle. Okay. So this is when we talk about quality grade, when we talk about a steer that's going to grade choice, the meaning that they have enough fat to be a good tasting animal. Yield grade, kind of the opposite. What we're talking about here is percent, and there's actually a calculation that we can do. We're not going to learn how to actually calculate percent yield grade, but we're talking about percent muscle over fat. What we're looking for is heavy muscled, thin steers are going to get a very good yield grade. Yield grade is actually given in terms of, and how did I do this? Okay, so on a scale of 5 to 1. Okay, And I did this up here so you can see that select is not what we're looking for. We want cattle to be down here on prime. Same goes for this scale here. A yield grade 5 steer is a very light muscled, super fat steer. Yield grade 1 is a very heavy muscled, thin steer. So you'll see some Piedmontese, and there's some breeds that are actually like doubled up, muscled, and ripped up, and that sort of thing. That's where, if you want to think about that, when we're thinking about yield grade 1 versus small, thin, light muscled, fat cattle are going to be a yield grade 5. Most 90% of what we're looking at in these livestock judging classes are going to be somewhere in the middle. Yield grade 4 is going to be a pretty fat steer. Yield grade 2s and 3s are more likely what you're going to see in a lot of these livestock judging classes. Okay, questions about quality grade and yield grade. Again, there are some breeds that are and some producers that are paid a premium based on yield grade or quality grade. So these are important to producers who are actually in the industry. That's why we use these terms in livestock judging, because it determines how producers are getting paid. Questions about those things? Okay, then we're going to move over here really quick. I'm going to run through these quickly. The terms that we've talked about so far, we've talked about fat, we've talked about muscle, we've talked about structural correctness. Those things are obviously very, very important when we're talking about market animals. Now we're talking about some stuff that is a little more fluffy, a little more, when we're talking about how these animals look, we want them to look balanced. So basically with balance, we're talking about a lot of aesthetic things. Are these animals, do they have the same amount of weight on both sides of their body? Both sides of their body. And really, this is more, you kind of get a feel for it the more livestock that you see. This would be animals that are out of balance, are going to have big, coarse, open shoulders and big, heavy briskets and have a lot of weight up front. Then they're going to be cut up in their flank and lighter muscled in their quarter. If you think about that, when you think about animals that are out of balance, we're going to see some, in fact, and I can show you here, and I will pull it up on they do a good job. This is one of the terms that they actually have a pretty good definition for. Okay, so lastdigestion.com with some of the terms, and this is all under tools. You can see that the way that they describe balance in livestock can be interpreted in several different ways. However, balance generally refers to the animal's proportionality or symmetry from the side. In essence, do all the pieces fit together? Do their chest and rear flanks seem proportional? An animal would be considered unbalanced if their chest was deeper and their rear flank was shallower. This is the example that they use of a well-balanced animal. You can see from the side that this steer isn't super low in his front end and cut up. He's relatively balanced as far as his underline, his rib shape, and that sort of thing. So this is something that you're gonna hear that word balance. It is referring to how evenly proportioned that animal is throughout their body. Questions? I'm gonna write that down. Evenly proportioned. Okay. The next thing I want to throw out is rib shape. We're going to talk, one of the confusing things about rib shape is that there are a lot of different terms that describe rib shape. When you hear bold sprung, when you hear deep bodied, anybody else know any others? What others? Cut up in their flank. We're all referring to, and these are going to be in terms of balance, these are going to be a lot of the same things that we use. we're talking about the entire midsection of this steer when we're talking rib shape. We're talking about how bold sprung they are, how wide their rib is, how deep they are in their rib, how much capacity that animal has for feed when we're talking about rib shape. The more rib shape they have, especially when we start talking about breeding stock, when we start talking about heifers and cows, they've got to have that rib shape in order to carry calves. And it allows us to feed them less and they can still maintain their weight and that sort of thing. So we're looking for rib shape. Rib shape is a good thing. And we can also talk about it as a negative if an animal is particularly out of balance. Questions about balance or rib shape. Again, these are not things that are as measurable as things like muscle and fat. They're not as black and white. These are more subjective terms, and we'll continue to get into more of those as we go through this. It's a little bit tougher to see. It takes more practice to be able to see balance and rib shape, but we will continue to work on that. Questions about these? Okay, I'm going to stop our recording here.